Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Off the Crutch. My name is Travis Davis. Before I get to today's guest, I wanted to mention that you can now text me directly on your podcast app. Underneath my episode, there is a send us a text message link. Click that and you're in business. You won't be spammed or put on any lists, and I'd love to hear from you. One of the things that I love about doing my podcast is interviewing people from all over the world. There are amazing people outside the US who are making their mark in the disability community. One man in particular is Martyn Sibley. Martyn works at the intersection of business, technology, and leadership to drive change for a fully inclusive world. Starting one of the first lived experience blogs in 2009, he's created high-quality content, built online communities, and started multiple businesses. Growing up with a physical disability, he's faced many personal challenges and successfully chased down many dreams. From working in London to driving a car with his hands, scuba diving, and being married to his soulmate. His mantra is, everything is possible. After gaining a degree in economics and a master's in marketing, Martyn started his career at a charity for disability rights. Following his love of blogging and social media, he quickly became a disabled influencer. Voted regularly in the UK's Disability Power 100 list, plus working in media and tourism for social change. He's a published author, Everything is Possible, a travel memoir, an international speaker, media spokesperson, appeared in the LinkedIn TV advert in 2001, and has published many blogs, vlogs, and podcasts. In particular, he live-streamed the Daily Sib for 4 straight months in the first months of the pandemic, interviewing a wide range of disabled people and disability allies. Disability Horizons was the first disability magazine to utilize online content and social media. Created alongside his friend Srin Madipali, it's given a voice to disabled people like never before. For 12 amazing years, it published educational and entertaining information by disabled people for disabled people. Accountable, also co-founded with Srin, disrupted the accessibility accommodation industry and was acquired by Airbnb in 2017. Most recently, in partnership with the GOAT agency, Global Leaders in Influence Marketing, Martyn started the already award-winning Purple Goat agency. In just 3 years, they're working with multinational companies and the best disabled content creators, giving representation to disabled people in advertising like never before. Now let's listen to the conversation. Thank you so much for your time, especially with the time difference, because Martyn lives in the United Kingdom, and I was just sharing with him that one of my good friends just spent a week out there, and I had a chance to meet with him yesterday to talk about his trip. And one of the things that he noticed was the lack of accessibility when it comes to retail buildings or restaurants. And Martyn, you mentioned that you've visited the United States before, but can you remember what type of differences you saw when you were here?
Yeah, it's my first couple of trips were as a child, so the memories are a little hazier. I came out in adulthood 2010. There's a guy called Srin Madipali who we both co-founded a couple of other projects, which we may touch on a bit later, but we as friends did a road trip from San Francisco to Las Vegas, then to Los Angeles. So we got to see a bit of that West Coast back in 2010. And then we did a trip to New York in 2011. Definitely the two coastal sides have factored into my visits and not so much that central heartland. But I think my overriding memory was how the physical infrastructure was very accessible. And I think that's implicit in your point, that roomier, more spacious. I think that, as well as ramps and elevators and all that kind of, physical access considerations. I think I picked up over the years that part of that comes from the legacy around Vietnam and the veterans, and that led to the ADA. And so there's definitely been enshrined in law that must have physical access element. And then I think as I've gone through adulthood as a guy with a disability that involves being in a power wheelchair, and I have live-in care, people that provide care support to me for a lot of my physical needs. I think the UK, switching it to a similar but different point, we have very good social care system. So I receive a payment from the local government, and that enables me to hire, train, and essentially employ the team of people that provide my care needs. You can tell me a bit more your general knowledge, experience, whatever is relevant in America, but from my understanding, the healthcare and the social care side is a lot harder for disabled people in America. So it feels, and I've done a lot of travel in different countries I go to, nowhere seems to have all of it nailed down. And there are places that are better and places that are worse. But I think the UK and the USA are amongst the best for disabled people in the whole world. But I would definitely draw those two distinctions of kind of pros and cons, if you like, between the two countries.
Sure, yeah. I do think that our healthcare system here in the US could definitely be improved, and some of the rules and laws definitely don't make it easy for people with disabilities to get married and keep their benefits. And so that's a whole other ball of wax that has, it's related but doesn't have anything directly to do with healthcare in that direct sense that you mentioned.
But I guess it's broader policy, isn't it?
Policy, yeah.
Yeah, some level of national or local government
Mhm.
policy, which, whereas the physical space conversation we started with still has a policy legal beginning. But I think that part of the ADA is very strong for sure.
Does the United Kingdom have anything similar to the ADA?
Yeah, so we did have the Disability Discrimination Act, which started around 1995. And then in 2010, they wrapped up multiple laws into the Equalities Act. So everything under the Equalities Act is around the sort of minority groups. It covers race and LGBTQ plus, and yeah, there's a few different strands, but the disability element is part of the Equalities Act. Whether it was the DDA and now the Equalities Act, the bit that is the frustrating part is it speaks about reasonable adjustment. So if a business has a product that isn't accessible for disabled people, you might say they're failing under the Equalities Act. But if it turns out that to fix that problem, to create that accessibility of whatever that product might be, would put them out of business or would impact their finances so much that they just couldn't do it, basically, that's understandably a reasonable adjustment. But what you find is what is reasonable or unreasonable is very hard to define. And a lot of things are still not where they could or should be, despite that legislation. And so the law hasn't really done the true job of being enforced to create an accessible world. And there are these sort of lots of parts of society that are still very inaccessible.
That might tie into why you started Purple Goat. And I'd just love to have you share with my listeners, like, what is Purple Goat and the reason behind starting it?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one with Purple Goat because it's very much grounded in all of my personal values, my experience around having a disability, being a disabled person. We can get into language as well. It's quite interesting. Sort of different wording in different countries, but in the UK, we speak a lot about the social model. And so I say I'm a disabled person because I'm disabled by barriers that are created within society. So I won't spin off into that right now, but we can always return to that. But so there's been a lot in my life and in my career that are head on about making the world inclusive and accessible for all disabled people. So not just those with the specific disability I have, which is spinal muscular atrophy. It's a form of muscular dystrophy, including all different types of disabilities. So when I mentioned my friend Shrin and the other projects, I've blogged and done a lot of advocacy since I came out of uni, which was back in 2006. I worked at a charity and not for profit for about 5 years. It was all about disability inclusion. Shrin and I ran a magazine for about 12 years called Disability Horizons. And then we co-founded Accomable, which is an accessible travel site that we exited to Airbnb. So it just gives like a flavor of the overall values in my career and other projects I've been involved in. So I think Purple Goat comes into the fray where we say brands have an opportunity and maybe a responsibility to be aware of hiring and employing disabled people. So we're not in the recruitment world or the HR world, but nonetheless, brands, for profit businesses, there's a whole thing about employment of disabled people. And then the other part is brands make products and services. We as disabled people are like, there's 15 million disabled people in the UK. I think it's like 1.3 billion disabled people globally. Rather than only looking at that as a charity sort of conversation historically, or even other narratives we hear in the media, the kind of triumph over tragedy narrative, or there's so many narratives around disability. There's this particular narrative, which is we as disabled people buy things from a supermarket and we go on holidays and all of the consumerism that, again, we can get into in a larger conversation of politically and democratically, is consumerism the best way for the world going forward in general? But if we accept that we are in a consumer society, and yet so many brands don't think about disabled people when they're putting new products out, new services out, and marketing campaigns should have representation of disabled people so that disabled consumers feel more affinity and more understanding of said products and services. So with all that kind of large jigsaw puzzle, that bigger picture conversation has come along to say, where brands are doing marketing campaigns, hey, why don't you work with disabled people to ensure that representation is authentic and true? And ultimately, you'll make more profit because there's a business case behind this whole consumerism stuff as well.
Did it take a lot of persuasion when you first started this company to get the businesses on board?
Yes, and it still continues to take quite a lot of time when you meet someone from a brand that you've not met before and they've not historically done much of this. A general marketing agency will also be having lots of business development, sales conversations, and there's always a part of selling any service like an agency. But when you layer in the disability part, there's definitely a bit longer to explain the considerations. And even when you've explained the considerations, I would say there's a lot of fear on the brand side of, if they embrace this opportunity, what if they do it wrong? What if they get cancelled? What if they say the wrong word about disability? Which comes back to that reference of language a minute ago. But yeah, and it still does take a long while. But we've been going 4 years. We're now working with global brands. We've done big campaigns. We've won awards. And so there's a bit more confidence and social proof and credibility, not just about us as an agency, but also that this broader business case theory is actually true and does stand up.
Did you always set out to be an entrepreneur?
I would say no. As I mentioned, I started working for a not-for-profit charity, and the reason I left wasn't as simple as, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur. It was more about, I can see what the challenges are at scale for disabled people, and I can see how charities did and still do good things to address that. But with technology evolving at a fast rate the last 10, 20 years, and with entrepreneurship and business as a vehicle to help enact some of that change, that's where I left the charity. And so for me, entrepreneurship is basically a way to solve global problems at scale. And it happens to be the vehicle that I use, but it was never the thing unto itself.
I've seen a lot of data that shows the higher employment rate for disabled people. And because of that, a lot of those individuals tend to want to start their own businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel like there was more security for you to do your own thing, like more security and more autonomy having a disability, doing your own thing, compared to like, this doesn't work out, maybe I'll just work for another organization again?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In the sense I mentioned, there were multiple factors. So when I left that secure salary, regular paid job with this charity in London, moving into entrepreneurship was definitely not the decision of financial security, because the job I was in was very secure. There was no risk of it going bankrupt or me losing my job. So from that perspective, in the beginning, it was actually quite a risk that I took. Whereas I think there are people that struggle to get into employment and to get that kind of regular salary job. And so they start their business from scratch because that seems to be the best option at their disposal. So I think there's a broader point that's good to voice, that a lot of people do turn to self-employment because there can be discrimination in the workplace and it's harder to gain employment as a disabled person. But there definitely was something for me, even though the charity was around disability. I was finding it harder to go to an office every morning, 5 days a week, 9 to 5. Because remember, this is back in '06 to 2011 when we hadn't had a pandemic, and working remotely was not really embraced even by, or as much by, even disability organizations. So there was definitely an element around my health, and particularly in the winter, it was a better decision for me. I think as a person, I've always liked working for myself. I've never liked to work for other people, and that's, whether that's a disability thing or not, we can debate, but it's certainly a personality trait of mine. So that was another factor. And I wanted to travel and see the world. So by being my own boss, working remotely, I was able to live out in Spain for quite a while under a project. That blogging on that project in Spain led to being invited to lots and lots of countries. Kind of the precursor to the travel business idea was that I ended up being like an accessible travel blogger. And so that was another part about the freedom to be in different places as a self-employed person. So yeah, there's multiple considerations and everyone's different. But I am at the moment on the steering group of something called the Lilac Review in the UK, which is looking at the statistics are really big about the number of disabled people who are in self-employment is huge. I definitely point people towards the Lilac Review to pull out some of the exact stats, because I don't want to misrepresent the statistics right now, but they're big, that's for sure. And so, yeah, it's like from an economic point of view, governments are like, how can we support disabled founders and support disabled entrepreneurship? Because that's got a societal benefit. And as disabled people, it definitely is better around managing health conditions and fluctuating energy levels. And I think for the listeners, there's like a really interesting broad point that can become quite empowering around entrepreneurship, as opposed to, oh, I'm doing it because employers won't take me on. And we should still hold those employers to account as well.
You employ disabled workers, correct?
Yeah, so I'm the majority owner of Purple Goat, partnered with another mainstream marketing agency. So we're majority owned by disabled people, or disabled person in this instance. And we're more than 50% of our team have a disability. There's an interesting thing around should it be 100%? But there are factors, all sorts of, again, so many layers, so many variables. But I think when we're talking to brands and people that have never come across disability, there's been a value to having, and we're labeling here by saying non-disabled, but there is a benefit and a value to that diversity of thinking, and that brands having that feeling of not only dealing with disabled people, but having that mixture in our team. So that's just been interesting to navigate that as we've gone. But yeah, we're remote first, so everyone works from home. We've got all of that, more than 50% of the business having a disability. There's a variety of disabilities in our team. So yeah, that's been fascinating to navigate for me as a founder and as an employer. And then also the influencers that we work with. So brands that work with us, instead of saying, make us a TV ad or do us a radio ad, we're very much specialist in influencer marketing, because we can work with a variety of disabled content creators to speak from a different lived experience of disability and have other like geographical variables, age variables, etc. But ultimately, the influencers that we work with are running their own self-employed businesses, and we're bringing, excuse my French, but a shitload of cash to the influencer economy as well. So whilst they're not employed by Purple Goat, they've seen an increase in income and work opportunities through our agency as well.
Speaking of influencer, and what I saw, I don't know how long ago, but I saw you on the Gary V experience. And for people that don't know, Gary Vaynerchuk is one of the most well-known entrepreneurs out there. And for anyone to spend some time with Gary V is really big. There was a couple of things I took away from it, is that when you logged on, Gary didn't treat you differently, or he was just like, all right, let's go. Like, how can I help you, Martyn? He wasn't like, oh yeah, you have a disability. And so I thought that was cool that he treated you as an equal. I'm sure in some of the spaces that you navigate, there are individuals who don't necessarily see you in that way. So, like, what your thoughts on that, and what did you take away from that conversation with Gary that helped you grow Purple Goat?
Yeah, so I think if I take that broader, how some people maybe speak to me or interact with me as a wheelchair user, as a disabled person, yeah, I've had over my life all sorts of weird and wonderful interactions, as you can probably imagine. And I think so, like, that's the thing that's true and happens. I think over decades, one way or another, it's better. Like, I think having representation of disability more in TV and film is on a par with what we're doing at Purple Goat, of having more disability representation in marketing and media, because quite simply, the more members of society that hadn't understood disability see us on screens and on phones, it just has a normalizing effect. And so I think generally people are a bit more, yeah, taking people as people. And we've seen broader DEI, right? Like, it's similar with race and gender and age and every other ethnicity, everything. All the DEI are still people out there that are ignorant and discriminatory. But I feel like that's becoming more on the fringes, and most everyday people are able just to have that. We're all human. Let's just have an interaction. And having someone like Gary Vee model that is also important, right? Because, as you say, he's very influential. So all the people watching that, they weren't like, whoa, Gary looked really awkward. So now I'm going to feel awkward if I meet a disabled person. They're gone, Gary was really chilled. So I'll be chilled if I meet a disabled person. So I think all of that's just good. I think definitely in business and at Purple Goat, there are times that maybe people have preconceptions of, can we deliver at high level because we have a disability, and that's up to us to just smash that preconception out the water. So yeah, tried to touch on a few considerations to that part of your question, and feel free to lean in more to an area if you want to. But in terms of Gary Vee, I think it was 2, 3 years ago I asked the question, but I was running Disability Horizons magazine had a short part to it, and I was trying to work out how to get the products on the shop that were for disabled people marketed to more disabled people. But there was an issue that Meta can't hold health information, like disability
Mm,
information. So when you use Meta to do like a paid marketing strategy campaign, you can't target a wheelchair user in London, even if you're selling the most awesome new wheelchair and you want people in London to know about it. So it was actually quite a technical question
mm,
around Meta paid and how to do that stuff. And his answer was helpful because it was basically like where there's a block, not just in this particular example, but any entrepreneur, whatever block you face, whatever challenge is on the way, you just find other ways around it. And I think he spoke about using Google Ads or like Facebook groups and essentially like just don't use paid, use a different strategy so you can still ensure that people get to hear about those products. So the broader takeaway would have been don't give up when you see a knockback, but just find a different way around to your objective.
I think that is helpful. And I'm sure that opportunity was a real great one for you to have just even a few minutes with Gary. And I just think it really speaks to the level that you're at and how you are very much forward thinking and you've started all these amazing companies and been a part of these organizations and all the things that you're involved with that we don't have time to chat about. But yeah, you just do so many amazing things. And I'm wondering, as we wrap this up, do you have any advice to folks with disabilities that are looking for jobs or want to start their own thing? What kind of advice could you share with them?
Cool. Yeah, happy to do that. And we've touched on a lot of different things in the chat, and I hope some of those kind of shining a light on
Mm,
there are parts of the world that still aren't geared up for us as disabled people. To Gary's point, don't let that beat you down and become like that you just want to give up. On the flip side, I and many other disabled people have, to your question, found employment, and I'll come back to that in a second. But more broadly speaking, disabled people have just done amazing things in different parts of the world, in entertainment and business and in politics. And I think there's something there around role models. So I think like when I was growing up, the main disabled people that were on my radar were the more campaign activist people who I'm still in touch with and have so much gratitude for paving the way that things have improved and will continue to improve. But I think we're at a point now, hopefully, and where we're heading to is that it's not just about being a Paralympian or like a famous TV person or even a successful entrepreneur, although I think that can be more attainable for lots of people. But those more kind of exclusive roles, the sort of film star and those sort of actually, we want disabled people to be teachers and working in banks. And so it's representation in all parts of life. So I think in the end, to the individuals listening now, it's sitting down and just tapping in to what excites you, what you're passionate about, what you know you're good at, and doing a bit of an audit around those types of positive things that make you feel lit up and the things in the world you just care about and want to make a difference. And from that energy and that clarity, there are so many different roles and employers and jobs out there to go after. And then the next part is you may not land it on that first email or the first day or the first week, that there will be that setbacks and meandering. The amount of things that I have wanted to do that have taken years and years. There's a bit of a patience game in those big achievements, but fundamentally, when you know what it is you want to do in the world and you go find the employers and the brands that feel ethical and aligned with you as well, there's so much opportunity out there. So it may not happen immediately, but if you stick at it, it will happen in the end. And in the longer run, you, the person listening, by doing that, will become the role model to someone 10, 20 years younger to see that whatever they want to do is possible. And I think there's something really exciting about that as well.
Those are wise words. I really appreciate you sharing that with my audience. And I really appreciate you being on today, Martyn. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And I'm sure we'll have multiple conversations in the future on my podcast to talk about some other things.
No, likewise. I know we've been trying to get together for a couple of years, and diaries and time zones were a bit against us. But yeah, thank you for having me on the show, and a lot of gratitude for you to do the interviews and keep spreading positive news to your listeners. So yeah, back at you, Travis.
Thank you for tuning in to today's show. Follow me on social media at Off the Crutch, or email me at offthecrutch@gmail.com. I would love to hear your comments, questions, or if you want to be on my podcast. Until next time, everybody, take care.